Flight 382 had reached cruising altitude, the hum of the engines providing a steady backdrop to the unfolding events within the aircraft. The sky stretched endlessly beyond the windows, a deep shade of twilight blue, and the faint glow of city lights flickered far below. Inside the cabin, passengers settled in, some flipping through in-flight magazines, others scrolling through their phones, adjusting their seats, or simply closing their eyes in hopes of passing the time swiftly on this long-haul journey from London to Dubai. Among them sat Jamal Carter, in seat 17A, a young professional on his way to a business conference. He had chosen the window seat, appreciating the quiet space it provided. With his headphones resting around his neck and a book half open in his lap, he was hardly paying attention to the movements of the flight attendants until a small, seemingly insignificant moment caught his attention. A moment that would soon escalate into something much larger. The flight attendants moved down the aisles with well-practiced efficiency, maneuvering the beverage cart past rows of passengers, offering drinks with mechanical smiles and nods. Everything seemed routine. Yet when the cart reached Jamal's row, something shifted in the atmosphere, so subtle that most would have dismissed it at first. The attendant working this section, Linda, a tall woman with sharp features and an air of practiced politeness, hesitated briefly before passing him by. Jamal frowned slightly, watching as she poured water for the passengers seated around him. He waited, assuming she would eventually get to him. But she didn't. Instead, she turned away and continued down the aisle as if he wasn't there. His initial confusion quickly turned into a quiet irritation. He pressed the call button above his seat. A chime rang softly in the cabin, and moments later, Linda turned back toward him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something almost calculated in her gaze. "Excuse me," Jamal said, keeping his tone calm but firm. "I think you missed me. Could I get a glass of water, please?" Linda's expression didn't change. "We're out of water in economy," she stated curtly. Jamal blinked. He glanced at the beverage cart, which still had multiple bottles of water neatly stacked in their compartments. He looked back at her, feeling a quiet sense of disbelief creeping in. "It looks like you still have some," he pointed out. Linda's grip on the cart tightened slightly. "Those are reserved," she said, her voice clipped. Without another word, she turned away again and continued serving other passengers, moving further down the aisle as if nothing had happened. A few people in nearby seats had noticed the interaction. A woman across the aisle gave Jamal a concerned look. A man a row ahead turned his head slightly, clearly listening. Uneasy glances were exchanged. The air inside the cabin seemed to thicken with an unspoken tension. Jamal took a deep breath, debating whether to let it go. But why should he? He had simply asked for the same thing every other passenger was receiving. He pressed the call button again. This time, another flight attendant, Emma, approached. She was younger, with a more approachable demeanor. "Is there something I can help you with, sir?" she asked. "Yes," Jamal said, keeping his voice steady. "I asked for a glass of water, but I was told there's none left." Emma frowned slightly, glancing toward the cart. "That's strange," she murmured. "Let me check for you." She moved toward the galley. A few moments later, she returned, looking more troubled than before. "Sir, I just spoke with Linda, and she said she already informed you that there's no more available." Jamal exhaled through his nose. He could feel his patience wearing thin. "I see," he said. "Then can you explain why there's clearly water left on the cart?" Emma hesitated. I'm not sure," she admitted, clearly uncomfortable. "Let me try to sort this out." By now, more passengers had taken notice. A few whispered among themselves. A businessman a few rows ahead discreetly pulled out his phone, capturing the exchange. The energy in the plane had shifted, What had started as a quiet moment of inconvenience was evolving into something much bigger. Jamal sat back in his seat, his jaw tightening. He had experienced subtle discrimination before, the kind that was hard to prove, always towing the line of plausible deniability. But this was blatant. A murmur spread through the cabin. A woman a few rows ahead turned back, her expression filled with concern. The man in business attire continued recording. Tension mounted, a quiet outrage simmering beneath the surface. Linda, sensing the growing unrest, kept her back rigid, her movements growing stiffer as she avoided making eye contact with anyone who might challenge her. Then a voice cut through the hum of tension. "Why won't you just give him water?" It was a woman seated across the aisle. Her voice was loud enough to be heard, firm but incredulous. Another passenger chimed in. "Yeah, what's the problem? We all got water, why not him?" The murmurs grew louder. Frustration rippled through the rows, the collective unease bubbling to the surface. Another passenger called out, demanding an explanation. The quiet discomfort had transformed into an audible protest. Linda's composure faltered, but she remained silent, gripping the beverage cart as if it were an anchor keeping her grounded. Emma, clearly distressed, disappeared into the galley, presumably to alert a supervisor. Moments later, a senior flight attendant emerged. Her gaze swept over the cabin, taking in the rising tension, the expectant faces waiting for a resolution. Without hesitation, she walked to the cart, retrieved a bottle of water, and handed it directly to Jamal. "I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding," she said, her voice carrying a professional calm. "Please, let us know if there's anything else you need." The cabin fell into a brief, heavy silence. Jamal accepted the bottle, his fingers curling around it as he locked eyes with Linda, whose expression was unreadable. The businessman lowered his phone, having captured everything. The other passengers watched, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and quiet anger. The energy in the plane had changed. What had begun as a minor inconvenience had turned into something far more profound. The rest of the flight continued in tense quiet. Linda avoided eye contact with passengers for the remainder of the journey. Whispers of discontent lingered in the air, and the weight of what had transpired sat heavy over everyone who had witnessed it. As Flight 382 began its descent into Dubai, one thing was clear. What had happened on board would not simply be forgotten. The footage, the conversations, the collective disapproval, all of it would follow, ensuring that this moment of silent resistance would become something much louder beyond the confines of the aircraft. Justice was no longer a passive hope. It was a demand.